Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. You are listening to a podcast by Pastor Eric Deepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. If you enjoy Faith Over Breakfast, we encourage you to rate it on the Apple Podcast app, on Spotify, or Google Play. Thank you and enjoy the podcast.
Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name is Andy Littleton. I am a pastor in Tucson, Arizona at Mission Church.
Yes,
I'm sitting
you
with
are.
Eric Deepen from the Village in Tucson.
You know what how AI spells my last name?
S-E-E.
S-E-A-C, Pin, P-I-N.
Cool. Well, you can... AI is wrong.
Yeah, it's definitely wrong.
It's the first time.
Yeah.
We've found the bug.
Yeah.
So it was one of those days where we came in, I had a thought about talking about the commencement speeches that have been
and we might talk
critiqued,
about that next time.
but we haven't listened to those.
Yeah.
And so we said we can't really go there yet. Maybe we'll get to that depending. But we ended up talking about what have we been doing. I was traveling, learned about a ministry context in San Francisco. We talk about the books we're reading. And you want to hear an interesting story from San Francisco and about the books that we are engaging with and why?
Yeah.
Today's the day.
Yeah, and we'll have all the links in the show notes. So, Andy, if you'll send me at least the names of your books,
Sure.
and then I'll put all the links in.
As tends to occur later in the podcast, interesting side conversation about hearing the voice of God.
Yeah.
So if you think you're in some... You go, well, I don't care what books they're reading. Yes, you do, because you want to know if God's talking to you, and you better hang in there.
And, I mean, we even get more heady because you start throwing down with Augustine and Rousseau. So, like, wow, if you're a philosophy nerd, you might even get, like 2 minutes of enjoyment out of this
Watch
podcast.
out.
Yeah.
All right. Imagine the possibilities.
So here's my pitch, and I will apologize because you're going to hear this pitch for probably at least a month. So here's the pitch. There are 3 podcasts. We have about 300 listeners between the 3 podcasts that I'm part of. We're looking for subscribers to help pay for producer and costs. You can subscribe for $3, $5, or $10. This is your NPR push, man. This is it. Do you like this programming? Is it of value to you? Does it enrich your life?
Not just NPR. I mean, this is if you listen to Christian radio.
Yeah.
They're all hitting you with, and we were not going to do that, and then now we do.
No,
we're just going with the flow.
We're going with the flow. So
because we want to pay our bills.
Please save a burrito. Don't eat at Chipotle.
Don't save the burrito like in your pocket.
Yeah, don't do that.
Just don't eat it. Don't order it.
Don't order it once a month, and just put us on reoccurring support. I guarantee you we'll say this for 4 weeks, and then we'll leave you alone until next April-ish, May. And then we'll bother you again. So, yay.
Yay.
Subscribe. Oh, and also, you'll hear at the end, you got an awesome opportunity. Send us a message. It's really simple. You can send it by text message. Ask a question. It's right there on the...
It's going to be great.
Yep. We're looking forward to it.
So, thanks for tuning in.
We're done.
Enjoy the podcast.
Bye. Hey, Andy. How are you doing?
Well, that's the podcast. What have we been doing? What have we been reading?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've been in the great state of California.
I was in the Bay Area. I was in San Francisco. Got back yesterday morning. Took my second nap that I can remember in my adult life.
So you've only had 2 naps in your life.
That I can remember.
Okay.
There was probably some more, but because it was just a very different kind of schedule this week. I got back in. I thought, I'll do some stuff. I had a wedding rehearsal last night. And I thought, I'll just kind of power through till the rehearsal. And then about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I just thought, no, I'm zonked. I'm really tired. And so I set an alarm, laid on my couch, and I fell asleep.
Well, let's talk. Let's take a real left turn here.
Real left turn.
And talk about wedding rehearsals. Now, first off, were you in charge of the rehearsal? So were you running it?
Not exactly. So that is always a question I ask.
It is a question.
As we're preparing for someone's marriage, I say, so in your mind, am I the one giving the talk up front and the pronouncement, and someone else is running the day, or am I running the day? Because the people have very different assumptions around that. So this particular wedding has a wedding planner who's there at the rehearsal and will be there on the day of and is doing all the here's where you line up and time to go. And actually, the bride is very dialed into that process. She's on top of things. So the wedding planner is very much taking cues from the bride.
Nice.
But yeah, the other weddings I've done, it's like everyone's just looking at me going,
all right, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
All right, so maybe you do it differently. So if I'm in charge, I give if you have any negative statements.
Oh, you do that, yeah.
Talk to me.
Oh, yeah.
Not to the bride or groom about how this is done.
Okay.
Because we're on the final stretch, so you don't get kind of comments to them. And then I line everybody up as to the way the bride wants them.
Uh-huh.
Then we make everybody walk backwards and then go back up. And that's how I do it.
Yeah.
How do you do it?
Oh, for a rehearsal?
Yeah.
Well, again, if I'm running it, it's one thing, but
yeah, if you're running it.
Yeah, we just do the walkthrough. Here's how we line up. Here's how you don't walk too fast for the photographer. There's your visual cue that once they pass that, now it's your turn to walk. This is all very simple stuff. And then I get up there and usually highlight I say, well, here's where I'm talking to the whole gathered group. Here's where I'm talking to you. Here's where the vows are. Rings, best man, hand me them, please. Thank you. That's how we'll do it. You handed off your bouquet, right? Yeah. And then, everybody goes down, and then we do it again.
Yeah, good. So sometimes I have been at weddings where the pastor is also in charge of everything, and he's not sure what he's supposed to be doing.
Oh, for sure. Well, I probably was once that pastor.
Thankfully, that was one of the things my mentor was really good at. Is showed me how to do weddings. I was like, well, she showed me how to do funerals, but I haven't done a lot of funerals. I've done 2.
Yeah,
that's all.
Oh yeah, I also have only done a few. I've done 2 for people I didn't know. One this year.
I've never done one for people I don't know.
I did one this year. My first funeral was for, I believe it was a 5-star general. We had a full military honor guard, and the jets flew over, and he was not a Christian, and that was the first funeral I ever did. Talk about intimidating. And I got sick that week, and I was like, just sucking on the throat drops. Just like, come on, please don't lose your voice during this wedding. And I got through it.
I mean funeral, but yes.
Sorry, funeral. Wedding to the afterlife.
Yeah.
To this, it was stressful. Yeah.
And they are a general because we're talking about loss and sadness.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I just realized I think I've done 3. But anyway, that's not important.
Yeah. Well, I talk about stressful. It was meaningful too. The reason I did that one was because it was serving a family where we had someone at the church, and this happened in their family, and they needed someone. And the one I did this year was someone I didn't know, was people I knew in a former church context who again needed help, and it's a way to serve these families. And actually, this last one I didn't feel stressed by. That first one is just the weight of it's the general and the flyover and all this stuff. And I've never done this before. And, but I'm getting more used to it. It's harder when you're close to the people.
Yeah, It is. It is much harder. Yeah. So anyway, there was the left turn and back to California, and you were probably there for some denominational things, I'm assuming.
Yeah, twice a year with the
good old Christian Reformed people.
I work with Resonate, which is the mission wing of the Christian Reformed Church, and so I'm one of the local mission leaders for the Western region. Most of us are pastors, not all, but we on top of our pastoral role, we have a few hours from the denomination per week that we dedicate to making sure people know what resources are available from Resonate, to trying to connect with people like church planters or what they call mission network developers, or just make strategic connections. I've recently been pivoted a little bit to being on the team that helps resource congregations if they want to do outreach, especially initiatives that tie in with denominational strategies or resources. So I'm there to coach or consult if a church is looking for insight on how to do outreach. We get congregations take us up on that every once in a while. I think a lot of churches, probably like the Village, and have their model down, but some, probably even more, don't know how to do that and feel a need for support. So that's that. So we met together this week. We do that twice a year to kind of talk strategy, share what we've been doing, connect as a team to make sure we kind of know each other and know what each other's up to. So we have work sessions. We'll tend to do a couple activities and meals together, and then we'll go see something that's going on in that city. So we usually go to one of the people's contexts. And this one was interesting because the church there is actually where a Christian Reformed Filipino pastor is on loan to the Presbyterian church as a pastor of a historic church that was about to be closed.
Okay.
So the church had dwindled down to just a few people, one of the oldest churches in San Francisco. So he actually helped lead them. They didn't want the church to, whatever happened, they wanted it to remain a church, the few people who were left. And so they actually worked to get it on the historic registry so its usage can't be changed.
Okay.
And they did accomplish that. So he's an interim. He's a retired pastor. So they accomplished that so it can't be turned into a pub or something. It needs.
Right.
So it may not be their congregation there. But here's the coolest thing he did. So his name's Fernando. So he's on loan to this church, but he's been very collaborative and willing. He sees himself as there about another 18 months max. And so he heard their heart. They wanted this to stay a worshiping community. They're willing for it to change if that has to happen, needs to happen. It's this beautiful old church designed by one of the first female architects in the States, which is cool. Helped with the historic designation. But he has just kind of been inviting all the community partners around and just trying to see what would happen if he just got people to meet together and see what would come of it. And so he met, first of all, there's a Christian couple in the neighborhood who had been very involved in big business. I believe they go to another church, but they had started a coffee shop just about a block away.
Okay.
And so they had moved to this area and had really embraced it. And so there's a greenway, and there was like a section where the houses had been taken out to put in a water pipe, a big water pipe that went up the hill. And a lot of vagrants would post up there, or I don't know what the right word is anymore, because some people say you're supposed to say homeless, others say you're not. So it was an area where they were getting some drug traffic and some vagrancy. And the neighborhood was concerned about that. What do you do about that? How do you not just do, cleanup projects? How do you do something productive? So some artists in the neighborhood had collaborated with an idea with the city to turn it into a park and a walkway up the hill. So that had happened a couple decades ago. So now you had this new feature in the neighborhood. And then this Christian couple moved in, and they started a coffee shop right on the greenway.
Okay.
And they sell locally made goods in it. It's kind of a store and coffee shop, and it's become kind of a little hub because people can sit outside in the greenway. And so those people started meeting with Fernando, and then they meet people in the coffee shop who are walking in the neighborhood because it's hard to park. And so once they knew that this little church was kind of trying to do something different, they knew who they could recommend to go check it out. One of the people who would kind of hang out in the greenway and exercise, he does martial arts, is a guy named Alfie, who was actually homeless. but very interested in the Bible, and seems like a great guy. He was recommended by the coffee shop people to go check out the church. And so he had believed in going to church, hadn't for a long time, mustered up the courage to walk in. He said he'd walked into a lot of places and felt very judged or like he was an outsider. And he thought that church was Spanish speaking. He'd heard people speaking what he thought was Spanish. And so he walked by one day and he heard English choir singing. And he thought, okay, well, they speak English, so I'll try it. So he's African-American. So he walked up the stairs. It turned out that they were just watching a video of an English choir. And they were mostly Filipino. But they were very excited to see him and welcomed him, and he felt loved and accepted. He's been there ever since. And he's actually training now, so they've helped him figure out housing on the church property. Because that was a challenge that he had, and San Francisco's expensive. So they're outfitting a little apartment, and he's like the full-time staff member at the church now, does all kinds of stuff, and he is training to be a minister.
Crazy.
And,
that's a great story.
And he's almost done. And Fernando's been helping him. And then he, because he's just like walks the neighborhood all the time, knew a guy who had formerly done ministry in the Tenderloin district, like street ministry. Anglo dude, rides a Harley, just has this background in ministry. And he had not really like found a new church since he'd moved. And so this guy, Alfie, knew him and said, hey, it's, St. James is where it's happening now. And so this guy and his wife came over. And so now there's this cool team. So that guy's in his like 60s, I think, and loves to do ministry. And so Fernando's kind of, really just been open. And he is going to leave this church with a really unique team of ministers. But he seems like he's gonna. It'll be a more diverse church than it was, and it'll be very much made up of the community. And when he's done with his interim, I think it'll be a very different church than it used to be. But it will be of that neighborhood, and it's pretty cool. So that's a CRC guy who was loaned to another denomination, who helped them out.
That's really cool. That's a great story.
So
that's what you get to hear in your job, is how God is working, and
that's
really exciting.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
As young husbands and dads, we've transitioned from singleness to one filled with new responsibilities. Marriage, parenting, and our careers can be overwhelming. Our wives, kids, and the people at work depend on us. How do we invest, effectively communicate, and lead well in these relationships? Do we burn bridges or build lasting connections? This show is called No Longer Nomads, and I'm your host, Josh Doyle. The podcast is dedicated to helping men follow the way of Jesus and build a legacy that outlives their lives by investing in their relationships now. Here at No Longer Nomads, we believe that every nomad needs a friend. So join us. No Longer Nomads, available wherever you get your podcasts now.
Totally. And it always gets me... It really has motivated me. Every time I go on one of these trips, I will think to myself, I go like, well, did we get enough work done? But I come back having heard a new story of God's faithfulness. Sometimes it's even one that you think, wow, this took a long time, or this is simple but beautiful. And I do come back with some wind in my sails.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's why I was there.
Yeah. Well, I didn't take any trips anywhere this week. I was not able to do that.
Yeah, you were here holding it down.
Yeah, but I will say, just to speak of God's faithfulness, one of the interesting shifts that the village has made, and you might not think that it's that much of a shift for us, but it's a pattern we intend to hold in leadership for the next, I don't know, at least through the summer. But we have taken our leadership meetings and sort of said, okay, we're done planning. We're done trying to figure this out. We're done in all of those kinds of areas. Yeah, there'll be some conversations that have to happen for logistics, but we're going to sit down and we write on the board. We go around. So this last week was, I think we had 15 leaders between elders and deacons, so to speak. And I'm like, you get 2 words to tell how you're doing. Go around, do that. Here are a list of things that God told us last time. And we put those down. And then we talk about the steps that we've taken to engage with those. Any new questions we have for God. And then we spend an hour and a half praying.
Yeah.
And listening to the Holy Spirit. Then people talk about what they heard God say. Then Mark and I, we try at least a little bit in the leadership meeting, but then later as elders to, boil it down and turn it into actionable things. And then we act on it. And some crazy things have come. I'm like, I would never have thought of that. And we would have never gone in this direction if we hadn't just sat and listened. And we've done it the last 2 leadership meetings. I think we're going to do it all summer for sure. And then have it as a regular habit. Because what I'm learning more and more is that what happens, even when you pray a lot, is that we don't listen a lot. So even when people pray in leadership meetings, we're praying a lot, we're not spending time to really listen or allow the Spirit to hear what he's saying to everyone. Because sometimes when you have brainstorming meetings, there are certain people who brainstorm a lot.
Yeah.
And there are others who stay quiet.
Yeah.
And
I brainstorm a lot.
Yeah. And so having the Holy Spirit be the one who is the main brainstorm brings out those people, brings out the gifts of people. So you see the people with mercy, like hearing God speak through their gift, or the people with wisdom, or the prophetic people. It all comes forward, and then it's interesting to see how he weaves it all together. So I've been really excited about that. That's the last 2 leadership meetings have just been, I'm like, man, this is awesome. It's also, I walk away really refreshed and exhausted, which is not necessarily an experience I have coming out of leadership meetings.
Yeah.
Usually I'm exhausted and I'm like, wow, did we actually figure anything out? Or what are we, I don't know if we should be doing what we just decided, whatever it is. And so, yeah, it's been helpful.
Yeah.
The last 2 times. So that's been fun. And I'm excited to see how that kind of spills out into our church over the next few months.
Yeah, that's good.
So, yeah, that's one cool thing.
Love it.
Yeah.
So, what are you reading?
A lot.
Yeah?
Yeah, I've probably since...
Read limericks for our senseis.
Easter. I haven't read... Well, I did. I skimmed it, but I did not read it. I actually put it into Word. This is the book you're writing and Rod is writing, and I'm in it. Some stories about me. So I put it into Word, typed in my name, which is humorous because guess where my name is? In Limerick.
Right in the...
So
that's really funny.
It is. But I found my things and read everything that was said. And for the most part, I'm like, okay, that's good.
Yeah.
So
okay, for the most part, we'll take it. That's good enough. So this is a forthcoming project between Rod and I. So Rod has these stories he tells over and over again, and he's been told he should write a book of his stories and of his things, his stories about Kathy, his wife. So I didn't feel equipped to do the Kathy stories. Somebody else has got to do that one. But the ministry stories, thought we could work together on. So he's said, I'm never going to write a book by myself. Too much organization and all the stuff he's not great at. And so at first I thought I would just do this collection and barely stitch them together, and then I realized no, these need a lot more
stitching,
not a lot more stitching. And so the approach I took is, so here's Rod, the mentor figure, older pastor. Here's Andy, the younger leader who he's sat with for years. And my stories, his stories are weaved into my stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's nice. It flows pretty well. Yeah. So I did read that recently.
Yeah.
But more, so since Easter, which isn't that long, really, 2 months?
Yeah.
I have read 5 books.
Wow.
I think. So I read Paradise King.
Yes, right. You were talking about that one. Which you said is very good.
Yes,
right?
It is really good. Created to Hear God.
Okay.
Which for people who are theologically astute will know that that's a book that comes from the wife of the Bethel Church in California, so it's a little Pentecostal.
So that means I'm not theologically astute because I didn't know that.
But anyway, it's really good, and that was super helpful. Was the most poorly written book of the ones that I read, but still a really good content. Then I finished reading Pray Like Monks, Live Like Fools by Tyler.
Pray Like Monks, Live Like Fools. Interesting.
Which is the book by the pastor of Bridgetown who took over for Mark Comer.
Okay. That sounds like a Bridgetown book.
It is. It is a fabulous book. Well written. I think if you were to read it, you would say, none of this is new. Mm-hmm. This is an amazing book.
Yeah.
He's a really good writer. Put it all together well. Very good stories. Very inspiring. Very thoughtful. So I read that book. There's a couple others that I read. Embodied. I read Preston Sprinkle's Embodied book, which is on the gender conversation. What does the Bible say about gender? Mm-hmm. It's really good. Preston's actually a really good writer. And then I am now reading in chapter 4 of The Suffering of God, which my father is funny. If you have listened to the Mars Hill, the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, the author of this book was brought on to talk about trauma. She's been working all over the world for 40 years with trauma. And so it is a book for pastors and then clinicians. And so my dad had been reading it. I had put it in my, book thing. You should read this. And he's like, have you heard of this book? I'm like, oh, yes, I guess I have. He's like, every pastor needs to read this and you should read it over and over again. I'm into chapter 4, and I would say every pastor who does not have the gift of mercy and is not going, it's just a dark book. I mean, in the sense of she's diving into some heavy stuff and asking you to deal with some heavy stuff and really confronting ministers or confronting the church and saying, like, look, in a lot of ways, we've been the perpetrators of trauma. On top of that, we have ignored it. And if we ignore it, then we're complacent. No,
complicit.
Complicit, thank you, in it. And it's been, I agree with everything she said. She says this in a very gentle but direct way. And I think it's...
Remind me of the title of that one.
The Suffering of God.
Yeah.
Or God, and something like that. I'll put a links. I have them all linked because people ask me about it. So I'll put them in our show notes so you can click on them and buy them on Amazon. So that's one. And then I'm I've tried to stop reading multiple books.
Yeah, I was going to ask, are you...
So I've changed. I'm trying to go one book at a time.
I prefer to be more like one book at a time, though.
So...
Some books that don't lend to reading straight through, or some are just more cumbersome.
Yes.
Learn to be a little more okay with letting that one go piece by piece.
Yeah, and that one would be, I picked up NT Wright's book on Paul, his big 800 to 1,000-page book. I started reading it, and I'm like, oh man, this is going to be so good. But this is a vacation book.
Oh man, to me that's not a vacation book.
See, for me, it's like it's going to be one that I need to have no distractions to really think through.
And that's what you want to do on vacation.
Yeah, I like that on vacation.
It's because you're a real pastor.
Well, we've known that for a long time.
We have, yeah.
I'm as real as you get.
You are real.
Yeah, no, but I mean, or a sabbatical, but I don't have that, right? So a vacation time would be my reading. Yeah, because I don't read fiction. Sue and I read it together out loud, but I don't read it.
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah, that's how we read our fiction.
Yeah,
it's out loud together.
Like love stories.
No, usually mostly fantasy stuff. Okay. We're nerds.
Yeah, so. That's the cutest thing I've heard in a while.
Oh wow!
I'm just
there you go.
Saying,
reading our little fantasy books together in bed. Right?
Dial it back. Chapter. We're gonna get an explicit on our podcast if you're not careful.
Oh, but I will just to make a plug here because there's another book that My wife is reading, and I will pick up after I finish this one. And I think it is one, if you're a pastor or you are a follower of Jesus and you are in relationship, you need to read The Great Sex Rescue.
Oh, there it is.
It is, it's important to read. It is. I heard about it because Preston Sprinkle interviewed people, but it's been going around. It's a really good book for people who are married to talk about, also to help prepare people who are getting married, or just your daughters in particular, but your sons too.
Okay. I hadn't heard of it. Thank you.
Yeah, so there you go. There's that's where but I'll tell you what happened. I mean, I do read a lot, but what I do normally is end up having 6 books.
Yeah.
And I'm reading all 6, and I don't really actually remember.
Yeah, that's a problem.
But during Holy Week, I got rid of social media and decided that I would replace all time that I would normally go to social media with reading a book.
Okay.
And it has been the greatest thing. I mean, I've been on one of those book tears, so I'm just tearing through books.
Cool.
Which has been good, because I haven't had that in a while, where I just feel like reading and wrestling with stuff. So
yeah. Nice.
Yeah, there you go.
Love it. Well, here's a few of mine.
All right, so sorry. Let me rewind here. Hey, Andy, what books have you been reading?
Oh, thanks for asking. Let's see. Recently, I'll skip. So I'm working on a program, another degree program, and so I finished reading those books a month ago or so. I will not report on those. So, after getting out of that reading, I went with Wrigley Field, A Celebration of the Friendly Confines. What a joy. Full of wonderful pictures of
great.
Beautiful Wrigley Field. I learned that so Wrigley Field, home of the Chicago Cubs, is called the Friendly Confines. And I learned that name came from a conversation between Ernie Banks and Jerry Kindall. And Jerry Kindall is a Tucsonan who was one of my elders when I was a youth pastor.
We both know him.
Yeah, and the conversation...
Well, he's dead now. But...
He has died. But that name came from him talking to Ernie Banks about looking forward to going home after a hostile road trip back to the Friendly Confines. And I had no idea his little conversation was part of why it was named that. How cool. So that was a refreshing, joyous little book to read. Beautiful pictures, well written, simple, good stuff. Then I finished a book I'd started on this trip, which was the classic Man's Search for Meaning. Have you?
The classic man, not
no. The Man's Search for Meaning.
Yes.
A classic book by Viktor Frankl.
Yes, it's in our bookshelf.
Yes, many.
It's required reading in psychology. Yes.
It is, and I had not read it yet, so I finally read the second half on my plane ride to San Francisco.
Yeah.
So Frankl reflects on. Here's a psychologist who was in internment camps and looks at what it takes to, survive and thrive in such a difficult situation, finds that it's having a sense of meaning, greater meaning, has some religious reflection on that, applies that to other situations. So that's the last one I finished. And then the books I'm working on. So I have developed some new habits. So one is I read a chapter before I go to sleep. And so those books, I need them to be a little chopped up into smaller bits, a little bit simpler, a little bit lighter.
Your sleepy books.
Move me into sleepy time. So right now I'm reading Mostly What God Does by Tucson's own Savannah Guthrie.
Okay.
So Savannah Guthrie is the, what is she, morning show host. So she's a television, well known in television world. I think she's on NBC at this point. But she wrote a book about God. So I thought, a Tucsonan who's famous wrote a book about God. I'd like to read it. And, Yeah, I have been back and forth on this book, but I'll tell you, I'm starting to think, so it's very simple little reflections, like very basic stuff.
Yeah.
And you can tell she's been influenced by a number of influences over her life. But here she's just basically saying, I was raised in church, didn't really connect with it, went through some hard times in life. I've come back to God, and I'm just trying to kind of get down. What does it look like as a busy professional to connect with God again and just realize that God is there and in my life? And I thought, this isn't deep theology. She'll give a very, she heard Tim Keller say this or whatever, little anecdotes like that. But then I thought, this is where a lot of people are. And considering that, I think she's actually doing a really good job. And maybe I need to be a little more in that space sometimes of helping people just see the basics for if you're trying to reconnect with God, here's what prayer could look like.
Sure.
Or something. So actually, yeah, so far I'm liking the book. Very different from what I normally read, but
that's cool. Good
job, Savannah. I like it. Then, in the complete opposite direction, I'm reading, what is it? Gunter, it's his last name, I think. The One, the Three, and the Many, which is an examination of Western culture's unraveling through the lens of a doctrine of the Trinity, like kind of showing how Western civilization is grappling with the ideas of unity and diversity and oneness and can't figure it out. And his belief is that the doctrine of the Trinity is where the answer lies. And that's
going very Irish.
Very Irish. Yes. Yeah. And that's so I started that book on this trip, and I it's interesting so far. I mean, I've thought about some of these things. I've seen in our culture there's a value of unity, a value of diversity. And I do believe that's a God-shaped value that people are trying to find an answer for. And you don't necessarily get all the answers just from naturalism.
Right.
And so I'm intrigued.
That's
and, cool. What is the other one? Shoot. It's in my backpack. Oh no, I'm forgetting. Well, it's going to be good.
Yeah, it'll be a good book, whatever it is.
Yeah. So I read the introduction to it, but I realized I wasn't going to get any further. And I can't remember what it is. Maybe it'll come to me. There you go.
There you go. So those are the books that we're reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. Some of those books that I mentioned have very practical things to engage with.
Yeah.
And then others are much more abstract in what they're kind of processing through. Particularly the suffering of God is going to have a lot more abstraction built into it, because there's a lot to talk about theologically in that process, along with the practicals. I think the one that the hearing God, created to hear God, is really fascinating to me, because I don't read Pentecostals very often. And she was very careful because she grew up in the Pentecostal world, but she never experienced everything that the people were experiencing around her. She's developed a lot of it as she's gotten older, but it's been really helpful, and I've quickly integrated the things that she said into our church, because she basically argues that we spend a life saying, no matter what stream that you're in Christianity, we will say to you people, God told me, right? But we don't. So we all expect that we should be hearing words, because that's what's developed in us, is that somehow, some way, we need to access this direct language where we are given words from God. Right?
Yeah, and you've mentioned this. I am cautious.
Yeah.
Very cautious to maybe to the point of not saying that.
Right, but it's part of our culture, right? We all say it. And so then, you're right. It creates a culture of people, well, fine, I don't hear words, therefore I don't hear God.
And I don't think I would say that, but I would say...
But people do.
For sure. It's something I hear a lot.
Yes.
and it makes me nervous. I remember Tim Keller saying, speaking of Keller, something to the effect of it. There's no argument with that that's effective. So somebody says, God said to me, well, how do you challenge that? You know, well, God said something else to me. It's a very individualistic way of hearing from God.
Sure.
It can be. And so I know that you in the Village practice a little more of a, I'm hearing this, and someone else can say, well, what about this, or what about this from the Bible? And you could kind of compare notes and discern what God might be saying through multiple voices. I'm more comfortable with that.
Certainly. Yeah, no, we have the communal listening, the Village. But what was fascinating in it is that she basically I think I may have talked about it on this podcast already, but I love it because she broke it down into 4 areas. And she said, yes, there are people who do just hear words. And I'm actually one of those people. I hear direct things, and they pan out to be true. And yes, there's all this understanding of Scripture, and and she brings this out all in Scripture. But there are people who just see visions, and I know people who see things. Like we both have a person in common. Rod sees visions when he prays. That's how he often hears from God. And then there are people who just have feelings. Like you go into a room and you're like, this feels evil. I don't know why it feels evil. Or this feels really light and peaceful. Like that's God speaking, she argues, and she goes through Scripture to try to make that argument. And then the other one is I think they come out of spiritual gifting, but the knowing, like the idea of like you just know we shouldn't do that, and people are like, well, why shouldn't we see it? You're like, I just know we're not supposed to do that, and you know that comes from God, that knowing, and it pans out. Now, the beauty, I think, and she makes this argument, is none of these things actually are supposed to happen as individuals. Right. Yes, you may have that knowing, but if you don't have that knowing in context of community where it's being fleshed out and practiced. But I think one of the things we don't do is practice hearing God's voice, both in Scripture, like learning to let Scripture speak to us in our life and guide us and lay that out. But also just we don't practice listening together. And getting it wrong. Yeah. Like that's not, we can practice other things. Like you practice teaching, you can practice, helping people, you can practice some of them, but you don't practice the more mystical. You just either have it or you don't. Yeah. And I'm like, wait, no, I think.
Yeah, we've talked about that on here before, which I find that's a new thought to me.
We did touch that. Yeah, that's right.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Anyway, she's been very helpful in just, helping people be like, yeah, that is a way that I end up listening to God, and I should articulate that more and let people respond to it. Yeah. But yes, you're right. I think it's one of the trainings of discipleship is other than things like thou shalt not murder, the things that Scripture is very clear about, you can say, God told me never to murder someone. Yeah, it's very clear in the Scriptures. But we should not have a culture where we're going around saying, God told me X. Yeah. We can say, I felt like God was moving me in this direction.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, well, it's dangerous.
Yeah. Like I truly believe that this was what God was calling me to do. Yeah. Well, okay, that's one thing. It's another thing to say, God told me, especially God told me this about you. Oh, yeah. I've seen that go real haywire. And so that makes me even more concerned.
Well, here's so in leadership meeting, this is an example of how it works at the Village. We definitely have somebody who's I believe is a prophet. They have that gifting. And this is how they open, we had a time of prayer and 40 minutes of listening. And his opening statement was, in the last time I did this, 2 of the things I said were not true. So take what I have to say with a grain of salt. Yeah. But this is what I think God is saying to you. Yeah. Yeah. That's a beautiful, and what he said was very prophetic. And what's interesting is when he reflects, what I've noticed is when he reflects on what he thinks God's told him, it's a little more I'm not so sure. But when he reflects on what God's telling you, you're like, yeah, no, that's very obvious. Because I think when we start talking about God has told me this, you're like, I don't think so. You're deceived. I think you need other people to be like,
I think you're trying to run my life.
Yeah.
I remember the other book.
Oh, see, I knew if I started talking, you'd be like, yep, there's the book.
The Church in the Age of Secular Mysticisms by Andrew Root. And this is one I'm going to a lecture by him. I went to one last year. I'm going to one in August again. And this book is where the lectures are coming from this book. So I'm going to read it by
Is that
August.
lecture in Phoenix?
It's in Michigan.
Oh, it's in Michigan.
But so...
Why have I heard of this book?
I may have mentioned it. I've been very interested in this book. And so I again read, like I said, the introduction. I just wanted to kind of whet my appetite, if you will, for it. So I've heard him say this before, but I'm looking forward to hearing it worked out, is that in our current age, our secular age, and he does a lot of work on kind of understanding the self and reflects on Charles Taylor. He's kind of a philosopher.
There you go.
But
Charles Taylor. I knew that this was the book that we were talking about.
Yeah. So he's written some other books that are queuing you up for this. But in our age of the self, there is a new way of doing religious and mystical reflection. And one of his premises is that we have moved into the age of the memoir. And he shows how even...
You talked about this on a podcast.
I did.
You did. Okay. I'm like, now it's all coming back to me.
And the introduction actually gets into his reflections on Rousseau, and Rousseau's Confessions was more of a memoir-esque, kind of a counter Augustine, and how we're now fully living out of that mode of that my personal spiritual experience is what is most important. And
so
then
what book are you reading? What's the name of it?
Church in the Age of Secular Mysticisms. By Andrew Root.
By Andrew Root. Okay, because I was feeling like the rise and triumph of the modern self is also very similar.
It's reflecting on Taylor as well, maybe in a little different way.
And Rousseau and all that.
Yeah. So reading the introduction, I'm interested. So anyway, it's and I like memoir. I've dabbled in. I'm learning to write memoir, and so that is very interesting to me. How we are getting our mystical and even religious experience through reading other people's stories. But most of the memoirs, and he notes this, are not about a transcendent God breaking in and providing for us what we cannot provide for ourselves. The memoirs are surviving something catastrophic, or becoming the hero that you thought you never could become.
Right.
And so they're focused on the self. And so that's Rousseau versus Augustine. Yeah.
Interesting. Wow, that sounds like an interesting book.
For sure.
Wow.
There you go.
Well, that's some compelling podcasting for you.
Yeah.
Now this is the literary podcast. We don't do a lot of literary podcasts.
Well, and if you say this content was really, just mediocre, you know what you can do about it is send an email to faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com.
And we're going to talk about this at the beginning, so you've already heard this.
Yeah.
Buzzsprout has done something really cool.
Oh.
So
that's our hosting site.
Yeah, that's our hosting. They're the biggest podcast hosting site in the world. And they did a survey of all their podcasts, or most of them. And they asked, what do you want? What do you need? Especially if you didn't have stats.
Oh.
And they said direct contact with your listeners. And so here's what they've done. If you look at your little Apple, wherever you see us, right underneath, and this may have to be fixed on ours, but right underneath the play, you will see send us a text.
Oh, nice.
You can click on it. It will immediately send you to your text messaging. It doesn't cost you anything.
Huh.
You can ask us a question. You can tell us anything. We do not get it on our phones. It immediately goes into our little environment, and it's called fan mail. And we can go through that and give us your name, and we will mention you on air. We'll ask you a question. We'll note that you've given us fan mail.
When podcasts get big, they charge people for this. My Cubs podcast has super chats where people pay $5 to make a comment. So we're probably on the verge of that, but we're going to keep it free for you all. Okay.
But I think this is great because I think part of it, even when I listen to a podcast and they're like, email a question or whatever, I'm like, yeah, okay, well, I don't have time. I'm just going to listen to your podcast. But if I can just see
right there,
then click it and send a quick, hey, I really enjoyed the podcast, or hey, could you guys talk about this? So much easier than the email. Man. So
for all of you who've been worried about the state of the world, this just makes everything better.
It solves the problem.
Wow, who cares who the president is? You can text directly to your podcast creator. So
that's so great.
And you can email us still for now, faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com. Yeah. Look out for that feature. And maybe you're reading something.
Yeah, tell us what you're reading.
Tell us what you're reading, and we'll either go, wow, that's interesting, or maybe we want to talk about that. Or maybe you'll give us a good book suggestion.
Right.
And we'll read it in 3 years, because the shelf is long in my case.
Long.
But, yeah. But if it's really good, I might move it up.
Yeah, there are ways to get books up.
Yeah.
We take donations, and that book gets really quickly up.
Oh.
Right.
Oh, if you give $100, we'll read your book next.
Yeah, it'll be up, and we'll review it and interview you. We'll bring you right in, and you can.
Did we commit to that? I don't know.
I don't know.
Gonna. My fingers are crossed, but it's possible.
$100, man.
That's not bad.
It's not bad.
Okay. Well, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you all. Thanks for listening to us chatter, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Andy. You've been listening to Faith Over Breakfast with Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. Please share us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you.